There comes a moment in every life when the noise becomes too loud, the voices of others, what you should be, what you must do, who you ought to become. They all swirl around inside like a storm. And in that storm, we begin to forget who we are. Clarity is not something you chase, is not a destination, is not out there, waiting for you on the other side of some mountain, or hidden in a book, a podcast, or the advice of a guru. Clarity emerges when you stop trying to become something and begin to simply be. Most people are addicted to movement, constant doing, constant thinking, but true direction doesn't rise from frantic motion. It comes in stillness, in the space between two thoughts, in the breath you forgot you were holding. There was a man named Aaron. For 12 years he chased success, climbing corporate ladders, collecting titles like trophies. His days were packed, his calendar full. From the outside he looked like a man who had figured it out, but inside he was hollow, lost. One night, in the silence of his apartment, he sat down, not to plan, not to fix, but to listen, not to the world, but to himself. It took weeks, it was uncomfortable, but slowly the fog began to lift. And in that quiet, he realized he didn't want the life he had built. He wanted something smaller, something real. He left his job, moved closer to nature, and now teaches young men how to build with their hands. He earns less, but lives more. You don't find clarity by asking the world for directions. You find it by subtracting everything that is not you, by letting go of identities, attachments, and roles that were never yours to carry. Have you ever watched a lake in the early morning, the mist rising, the surface still? In that stillness you can see everything. The reflection is pure, your mind is the same. When it is still, it reflects truth. But when it's stirred by fear, judgment, or pressure, it distorts reality. When the mind is quiet, the heart speaks, and its voice is soft, not urgent, not loud, just a knowing, a whisper, this way. Many people are waiting for lightning bolts, grand revelations, but often clarity comes in the form of a gentle nudge, a moment of deep peace when you realize you don't need to prove anything anymore. You're already enough right here in this breath. There was a woman named Lila. She was a dancer once. Then life happened, kids, bills, responsibilities. She forgot about the music until one day, while walking past a small studio, she heard it again, the rhythm, the echo of her younger self. Her eyes welled up with tears, not because she missed it, but because something deep within her remembered. That was her moment. She stepped back into the studio, not to reclaim the past, but to reconnect with her essence. That's what clarity is, not a decision, a remembering, a return. You don't need to figure everything out. You don't need a 5-year plan. You need presence. You need courage to listen, to trust what rises in the silence. Life is not asking you to conquer it. Life is asking you to feel it. In this moment, drop everything you think you are. Let go of the mental labels, the roles, the stories, and just be here, now. This stillness, this awareness. This is the space where clarity lives. Clarity is not found in doing more, but in being still. This is one of life's quiet paradoxes, something so simple, yet so often missed. In a world obsessed with hustle, ambition, and constant movement, we are taught that the answers lie just beyond the next achievement, the next milestone, the next breakthrough. We believe that if we can only do more, learn more, become more, we'll finally figure it all out. But the more we do, the more lost we often feel. The more we chase clarity like it's a prize at the top of a mountain, the more it slips through our fingers like mist. Clarity does not respond to force. It does not arrive through pressure, panic, or performance. It comes when we stop, when we pause long enough to hear what is beneath the noise. Stillness is not laziness. Stillness is not inaction. It is the most courageous thing we can choose in a culture that worships busyness. It takes bravery to stop running and simply be with ourselves, to sit in the quiet without trying to fix or control, to rest without guilt. Because in that stillness, all the distractions fall away, all the masks begin to loosen, and something deeper, something real starts to emerge. A young artist once told a story of how she had lost all inspiration. She tried everything, new techniques, more classes, different materials, forcing herself to paint every day. But the more she pushed, the more disconnected she felt from her art. Until one day, in frustration, she walked away from the studio and spent time doing nothing but walking in the woods each morning. No phone, no music, just silence. She did this for weeks, and in one of those quiet walks, watching sunlight pour through the trees, she suddenly began to weep, not out of sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of peace. A vision for a painting emerged in her mind, fully formed. It wasn't something she figured out. It was something that found her when she stopped trying so hard to find it. This is the nature of clarity. It arrives like sunlight breaking through clouds. When the winds of effort finally settle, you don't need to add more to your life to gain direction. You need to listen more deeply to what's already within. And that kind of listening only happens in stillness. Clarity is not a product of effort. It is the byproduct of presence. When the mind quiets, the heart speaks. And in its whisper, you find the answer you've been searching for all along. You don't chase clarity, you create space for it to emerge. This may feel counterintuitive in a world that constantly tells you to pursue everything with urgency. We've been conditioned to believe that if something is important, it must be pursued relentlessly, that answers come from force, from control, from aggressive strategy. But clarity doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't bloom under the weight of expectation. Instead, it arrives quietly when you make room for it, like a guest that only enters when the house is finally still. Clarity isn't a destination on a map. It's not a treasure buried beneath layers of effort. It's more like a pool of water. When stirred, it becomes cloudy, but when left untouched, it settles and becomes clear. The more you chase it, the more turbulent the water becomes. But the moment you stop chasing, the moment you allow stillness, something miraculous begins to happen. The answers you are looking for start rising from the depths of your being, not because you hunted them down, but because you made space for them to surface. This principle played out in the life of a man named Jordan, a high-performing entrepreneur who had built a multi-million-dollar business by the age of 30. On the outside, he was successful, driven, respected, but on the inside, he felt like a man walking through a fog. Despite all the accomplishments, he felt disconnected from meaning, unsure of what truly mattered. He kept thinking the next business move The next investment, the next level would bring him clarity, but it didn't. It only added more noise, more decisions, more confusion, until one day, completely burned out, he stepped away from everything, his company, his goals, even his routine. He took a sabbatical, not to plan his next move, but to be alone with himself. He sat on a mountaintop in silence for days, journaled without trying to solve anything, and walked without a destination. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to be someone, and in that stillness he remembered why he started in the first place, not to chase numbers or recognition, but to create something meaningful, something that lit him up inside. That clarity didn't come from spreadsheets or mentors. It came from space, from simplicity, from silence. So often we fill our lives with more in hopes of discovering what we want, more information, more opinions, more productivity hacks. But clarity doesn't live in the clutter. It lives in the spaces between. It reveals itself when we subtract, not when we add. When we remove the excess noise, the unnecessary striving, the compulsive need to figure it all out, clarity arises. Gently, naturally. To create space means to stop filling every moment with distractions, to be okay with not knowing for a while, to surrender the frantic search and become deeply present with what is. It is in this space, this sacred, often uncomfortable space, that clarity, like light through an open window, finds its way in. True direction comes from within, not from external voices. This is a truth most people only realize after years of following the noise. From the moment we are young, we are handed scripts, spoken and unspoken, about who we are supposed to be. Be successful, be smart, be strong, get a respectable job, make your parents proud, follow the rules, fit in, don't fail. And so we begin shaping our lives not by inner calling, but by outer expectation. We learn to listen more to the voices around us than to the one within us. But no matter how convincing those voices are, no matter how loud or well-intentioned, they can never replace the quiet truth of your own heart. Direction that comes from outside will always require validation. It needs applause to feel real. It needs results to feel worthwhile. But direction that rises from within, deep, intuitive, soul-aligned direction, needs no approval. It simply is. It is rooted in something unshakable. It may not always make sense to others, it may defy logic or convention, but it carries a peace so profound that even in uncertainty, there's a sense of rightness. There was a young man named Dev who spent years becoming what everyone told him he should be. He studied finance because it was practical. He got a job at a prestigious firm because it impressed people. He wore the right clothes, said the right things, and kept his inner voice buried under the weight of expectation. But late at night, after the world had quieted, a restlessness stirred inside him. Not anxiety, not fear, just a persistent sense that he was living someone else's life. It wasn't until he took a trip alone to the Himalayas that he allowed himself to ask the question he had been avoiding. What do I really want? Not what will make others proud, not what sounds successful, but what feels true in the silence of those mountains, far from noise and pressure. The answer arose effortlessly. I want to teach. I want to serve. I want to live simply and help others grow. It wasn't expected, but it was real. He left his job a few months later, not to escape, but to return to himself. Today he works with young students, guiding them through emotional healing and personal growth. He earns less than he used to, but he wakes up full of purpose, not dread. That's the kind of clarity only the inner voice can bring. The truth is, everyone has that voice. The one that knows, the one that doesn't scream but whispers. It's easy to ignore because it doesn't fight for attention, but it never leaves, it waits patiently beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath fear, beneath expectation. It's there. And when you finally begin to listen, when you start choosing your path based on what resonates deep inside rather than what earns the most approval, you begin to feel something rare and powerful. Alignment, not just with your goals, but with your soul. Letting go is more powerful than holding on. It sounds simple, almost counterproductive in a world that glorifies control, ambition, and persistence. We are taught to hold tight to our plans, our identities, our beliefs, our goals, to grip life with everything we've got, because if we don't, we fear we'll all fall apart. We fear we'll lose control. But the truth is, the tighter we hold on, the more we resist the natural flow of life. And it's in that resistance where confusion, anxiety, and disconnection begin to take root. Letting go is not about giving up. It's not surrendering to apathy or carelessness. It's about releasing what no longer serves you, beliefs that aren't true, goals that aren't aligned, expectations that don't belong to you. It's about loosening the grip so that life can breathe again. We spend so much energy trying to force clarity through effort. But clarity, real clarity, doesn't come through force. It comes through release, through space, through trust. Letting go creates the room where insight can rise. Imagine someone hanging onto a rope that's fraying at both ends. They're terrified to let go, even though the ground is just inches below. In their mind, releasing the rope means falling. But in reality, it's the only way to regain solid ground. That rope may represent an old identity, a relationship, a career path, or a version of yourself that once felt safe. But if it's no longer aligned, holding on only leads to exhaustion and fear. There was a woman named Mariah who had spent most of her life in a high-powered corporate role. She was praised for her work ethic, her sharp mind, her resilience, but she was quietly unraveling. Each promotion added weight. Each achievement felt more hollow than the last. She couldn't explain it to anyone. On paper, everything was perfect, but inside she felt like a stranger to her own life. For months she clung to the role, believing that walking away would be failure, that she would be letting others down, that her value came from what she did, not who she was. Then one morning, sitting in her car before another meeting, she felt a moment of complete stillness. A voice, not loud but certain, rose within her. "You're done here." And for the first time, she didn't resist it. She didn't analyze it or argue. She simply allowed it. She walked away from that life not because she had a new plan, but because her soul was asking her to. That decision, though terrifying, opened doors she never could have imagined. Today, she mentors women in transition, helping them find their voice in times of change. It all began the moment she let go. What we cling to often clings back, but what we release frees us. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's an act of trust in something deeper, something unshakable within you. When you release what no longer fits, what truly belongs has the space to find you. Stillness is the mirror in which truth reflects. In a world that moves fast, that rewards noise, that constantly asks us to respond, react, and perform, stillness can feel unnatural, even threatening. But stillness is not emptiness. It is not the absence of life. It is the presence of something deeper. It is the place where clarity, insight, and truth reveal themselves without force. When we are constantly moving, doing, thinking, we stir the waters of the mind. Everything becomes murky, distorted. But when we stop, truly stop, and allow silence to take root, the surface begins to settle. And in that stillness, the truth becomes visible, clear, undeniable. Most people never slow down long enough to really see themselves. They keep going, not because they're certain, but because they're afraid of what they might find in the silence, afraid that stopping means falling behind. But the greatest breakthroughs, the deepest clarity, come not when we speed up, but when we pause, when we get quiet enough to hear what life has been trying to tell us all along. There's a story of an athlete named Reuben who had been training for the Olympics for most of his life. Every day was structured, intense, planned to performance. His identity was tied to performance, discipline, excellence, but one injury changed everything. Suddenly the routine vanished, the training stopped, and for the first time in years he had nothing to do. At first, the stillness terrified him. It felt like failure, like loss. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Without the noise of constant striving, he began to hear a different voice, a quiet knowing. A part of himself that had long been silenced began to speak. And it wasn't asking for medals or approval. It was asking for presence, for healing, for reconnection. In that forced stillness, he began writing, something he had once loved as a child. What started as journaling turned into stories. Those stories turned into a book. And when it was published, people were moved, not by his victories, but by his vulnerability, his truth. None of it would have surfaced if life hadn't slowed him down, if he hadn't been willing to meet the silence without resistance. Stillness is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It is in stillness that the heart can speak, not in shouts, but in whispers. Not with logic, but with wisdom. The mind may race, but the heart waits in the quiet. It holds answers you cannot think your way into, answers you can only feel when everything else falls away. We often search for clarity through more advice, more information, but the truth is, the answers we seek are often already within us. They are just buried beneath layers of thought and noise. Stillness does not create the truth, It reveals it. Like a mirror polished by silence, it reflects back who we really are and what really matters. And in that reflection, clarity is no longer something we chase, it becomes something we see. Real clarity feels like a remembering, not a discovery. It doesn't arrive like a bolt of lightning from the outside, but more like a quiet homecoming, a deep inner recognition of something you've always known, but perhaps forgot along the way. We live in a culture that convinces us we are blank slates, waiting to be filled up with knowledge, credentials, and opinions. We're told to go out and find ourselves, as if who we are is hidden out in the world somewhere, waiting to be uncovered by effort or chance. But the truth is, you are not something to be found, you are something to be remembered. There is a timeless self within you, a knowing that exists beyond the noise of the mind, beyond your past, your achievements, or your failures. It doesn't scream for attention, and it doesn't demand validation. It waits silently. It waits for you to return. And that return, the quiet inner shift where you realize you've known the truth all along, is what clarity really is. There was a man named Elias who spent over a decade traveling the world searching for meaning. He studied under monks, climbed sacred mountains, read every philosophy book he could get his hands on. He was sincere, devoted, but also restless, because every answer seemed to raise more questions. He was always just one teaching away from feeling complete. And then one day, sitting alone by a river in Nepal, exhausted and disillusioned, he simply stopped searching. He sat, he breathed. And in the stillness of that moment, something shifted, a memory, not of a place or a person, but of a feeling, arose within him, a sense of belonging, of peace. It wasn't something new, it was something ancient, something that had always been there, waiting. That was clarity, not a new discovery, but a return to what had always been true beneath the layers of seeking. Elias didn't find the truth, he remembered it, and in remembering, he stopped running. He realized the search had never been about discovering something outside. It was about removing the barriers inside that kept him from feeling what was already there. This is the nature of clarity. It doesn't come dressed in excitement or novelty. It arrives in the quiet, and it often feels more like a sigh than a celebration. A gentle yes deep in the soul, a nod of recognition, not revelation. You don't need to go further, you just need to go deeper. You don't need to become someone new, you need to return to someone true. When you stop chasing after who you think you're supposed to be, you begin to remember who you already are. And in that remembering, there is peace. Not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of knowing you are finally aligned with your own essence. That is clarity, not a moment of discovery, but a moment of coming home. Clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or force, it comes gently, like the soft unfolding of dawn, slow and quiet and full of truth. In a world that values volume and urgency, we are conditioned to listen for what is loud. We chase advice from experts, absorb endless opinions, and fill every quiet moment with distraction. We wait for clarity to strike like lightning, something dramatic and obvious that will erase all doubt and tell us exactly what to do. But real clarity, the kind that changes you from the inside out, rarely comes that way. It doesn't compete with the noise, it waits for the noise to fade. Most of us miss clarity, not because it isn't there, but because we've become too loud to hear it. Our minds are crowded with questions, expectations, and the weight of trying to get life right. But the voice of clarity is more like a breath than a command. It's the subtle feeling in your chest when something just feels right, even if you can't explain it. It's the inner nudge, the gentle pull towards something that resonates deep within you, not because someone said it's important, but because it touches something sacred inside. There's a woman named Annika who worked in a high-profile tech company. She was brilliant, capable, and respected, but she felt like she was living on autopilot, always busy, always moving, never quite connected to what she was doing. She spent months trying to figure out her next move. She made lists, took career assessments, consulted mentors. Everyone had an opinion, and all of it only made her more confused. Nothing felt clear. Until one quiet afternoon, sitting in a cafe with no agenda, she noticed a little girl drawing at the table next to her. The girl was lost in her world, free and joyful. Something about that moment pierced through Annika's thinking. A quiet whisper rose inside her. "You've forgotten how to play. You've forgotten your joy." It wasn't an answer, not in the logical sense, but it was a truth, a seed, a whisper. And it led her to explore something she had buried years ago, her love for storytelling and illustration. Today she writes children's books, not because a loud voice told her to, but because she listened to the whisper, the one that had been there all along, waiting beneath the noise. The whispers of clarity aren't dramatic. They often show up as questions that gently tug at you. What if I didn't need to prove anything? What would I do if I weren't afraid? What lights me up even when no one is watching? These are not answers in themselves, but openings, invitations. Clarity isn't something you conquer, it's something you allow. And the more attuned you become to the whispers, the more they guide you, not in rigid certainty, but in quiet, steady truth. The whisper knows. And if you create enough space to listen, it will always lead you where you're meant to go. Clarity is not the absence of fear, but the presence of something deeper. Many people wait for fear to vanish before they act, believing that true clarity must feel certain, safe, and free of discomfort. But that's not how it works. Fear doesn't always disappear when you find clarity. It often stands right beside it. The difference is that when you're clear, fear loses its power. It may still whisper doubts, it may still tremble through your body, but it no longer leads. What takes the lead is something quieter and stronger. A deep inner knowing that says, "This is mine to do." We confuse clarity with confidence. We think clarity means we'll feel brave and ready, but clarity doesn't always feel like courage. It often feels like truth, and truth can be tender, vulnerable, even terrifying. It asks you to step out of what's familiar. It asks you to walk forward, not because the path is guaranteed, but because your soul is asking you to. Real clarity isn't about being fearless. It's about being faithful. faithful to what you know deep down, even if the surface is shaking. There was a man named Raphael who always dreamed of becoming a musician, but he buried that dream under layers of practicality. He became an accountant, followed the expected path, told himself it was responsible, but the longing never left. It showed up in subtle ways, in quiet discontent, in the way his heart lit up when he passed by street performers, in the ache he felt when he held his old guitar. One evening, after years of ignoring that voice, he sat alone with it, no distractions, no rationalizations, just him and the truth he had buried. And in that moment, clarity came, not in the form of a loud revelation, but as a still, undeniable truth. I have to, that was it. Not I will succeed, not this is safe, just I have to try. And with that knowing came fear. What if he failed? What if it was too late? What would people say? But the clarity remained, and it was stronger than the fear. He didn't quit his job the next day. He didn't abandon everything. But he began, quietly, consistently, late nights, small gigs, recording songs in his garage. Over time, the fear softened. The clarity didn't. Years later, music became his full-time life, not because fear disappeared, but because he stopped letting it decide. Clarity doesn't eliminate fear. It just gives you something more honest to follow, something that doesn't need to be proven or defended. You may still feel uncertain, you may still question yourself, but underneath all of that, there's a thread, a quiet pull toward truth. And when you follow it, step by step, you begin to realize that fear is not the enemy of clarity. It's just the echo of old beliefs trying to protect you from the unknown. That your clarity, your deep inner knowing, is not afraid of the unknown. It is the path through it. So in the end, finding clarity in life is not about seeking louder answers, chasing perfection, or erasing every trace of fear. It is about returning to stillness, to presence, to the quiet whisper of your inner truth. It is about remembering who you are beneath the noise, the conditioning, and the expectations placed upon you. Clarity lives in the subtle, the soft, the sacred spaces within you that you often overlook while trying to get it all right. It doesn't demand that you know everything. It only asks that you listen, that you trust, and that you have the courage to let go of what no longer fits. When you stop trying to control the outcome and instead begin to align with what feels real and true, something shifts. You begin to feel, not just think, your way forward. You begin to sense your path step by step, not because someone else has drawn it for you, but because your soul is guiding it from within. The answers may not come all at once, and that's okay. Clarity rarely arrives in a dramatic flash. It often unfolds slowly, like dawn spreading across the sky, one breath, one step, one truth at a time. So don't rush it, don't force it, don't wait for life to be perfect before you begin. Find the courage to pause, to listen, to remember. Let the stillness speak, let your heart lead, and above all, trust that even when things feel uncertain, there is a deeper clarity already inside you, waiting not to be found, but to be felt. When you learn to listen to that, you don't just find your path, you become it.